In the year 900, a cavalry force rode out from Bukhara and shattered an army twice its size. The commander who won that battle was not a king by birth. His grandfather had been a landowner in the mountains south of Samarkand. Within a single generation, his family would rule everything between the Iranian plateau and the edge of the Chinese frontier, and the city they governed would hold a library so vast that a teenage boy who was allowed inside would emerge with the knowledge to write books that European universities still taught 600 years later. That city was Bukhara. That empire was the Samanid state, and what happened there between 900 and 999 changed the intellectual history of the world. The Samanid dynasty took its name from Saman Khuda, a landholder from the region of Balkh, whose descendants were appointed as governors under Abbasid authority in the early 9th century. 4 brothers received 4 provinces: Samarkand, Fergana, Shash, and Herat. Power gradually consolidated. In 882, Ismail ibn Ahmad took control of the family holdings and made Bukhara his capital. In 900, he defeated and captured Amr ibn Layth, the Safarid ruler of Khurasan, in a battle near Balkh. The Abbasid Caliph, who had no means of stopping him, formally recognized Ismail as governor of the entire eastern territory. Ismail ruled until his death in 907, and the state he left behind stretched across what is now Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and much of Iran. What makes the Samanid century remarkable is not the size of the territory. Larger empires had risen and fallen across the same ground. What makes it remarkable is what the Samanids chose to do with their revenue. Bukhara under Samanid rule became the administrative and cultural center of the Eastern Islamic world. The state operated through a formal bureaucracy of 10 government departments, each with its own building around the central square, handling taxation, correspondence, the treasury, the guard, the postal and intelligence service, land administration, and religious endowments. Persian, written in Arabic script, was revived as a language of administration and literature after 2 centuries in which Arabic had dominated all formal writing. The consequences of that single decision are still visible today in the existence of modern Persian as a literary language. The court patronized poets directly. Rudaki, who died around 941, worked at the Samanid court and is regarded as the founder of classical Persian poetry. The historical record credits him with an enormous body of verse, most of which has been lost. Dakiki began a versified history of the Persian kings and was killed before completing it. His unfinished work was later absorbed into the Shahnameh of Firdausi, who began composing that epic in the final decades of Samanid rule. The scientific and philosophical output of the period was equally concentrated. Bukhara, Samarkand, and the surrounding cities produced physicians, astronomers, mathematicians, and legal scholars in numbers that no other region of the Islamic world matched during those 100 years. The wealth that paid for this came from 3 sources, and each one is worth understanding. The first was agriculture. The oases of Transoxiana were irrigated by canal networks of extraordinary sophistication, drawing from the Zarafshan and the Amu Darya. Bukhara sat at the end of a delta system that supported dense settlement and produced surpluses in grain, fruit, and cotton. The second was manufacture. Samanid workshops produced textiles that were exported across the Islamic world and beyond. Paper, whose manufacture had reached Samarkand in the 8th century, became a Transoxianan specialty and a major export. Samarkand paper was known throughout the Middle East and displaced papyrus and parchment across the region. Metalwork, glass, and the distinctive Samanid slip-painted ceramics, decorated with elegant Arabic inscriptions on white grounds, were traded far beyond the borders of the state. The third was trade, and specifically the silver trade with the north. Samanid silver dirhams have been excavated in enormous quantities across Russia, Scandinavia, the Baltic coast, and as far as Britain and Iceland. Hoards containing tens of thousands of Samanid coins have been recovered from Viking Age sites. The coins traveled north along the Volga route, exchanged for furs, amber, wax, honey, and slaves. Bukhara was, in the 10th century, one of the principal engines of the northern European economy, and Viking traders in Sweden were handling money minted in Central Asia. There is a detail here that historians have documented carefully. The Samanid silver flow into northern Europe declined sharply toward the end of the 10th century, and the archaeological record shows the drop. The reason appears to be the exhaustion of the silver mines that supplied the mints, combined with the political fragmentation that ended the dynasty. That fragmentation came from two directions at once. To the south, a Turkic slave soldier named Alptegan, who had risen to command the Samanid Guard, seized the fortress town of Gazna in 962. His successors turned that base into an independent power. Under Mahmud of Ghazni, who ruled from 998, the Ghaznavid state became the dominant military force in the region and stripped the Samanids of their southern provinces. To the north and east, the Karakhanids, a confederation of Turkic tribes who had adopted Islam in the 10th century, pressed toward the Sir Darya. In 992, they briefly occupied Bukhara. In 999, they took it for good. The Karakhanid commander Nasr ibn Ali entered the city. The last effective Samanid ruler was deposed, and the dynasty that had governed Transoxiana for more than a century came to an end. A surviving prince attempted to restore the family with support from various local powers and was killed in 1005. The empire ended. The intellectual infrastructure did not. The scholars trained under Samanid patronage carried the work forward under the dynasties that replaced them. The Persian literary revival the Samanids had funded produced the Shahnameh, completed under Ghaznavid rule around 1010. The Bukhara library that had held the accumulated learning of the age burned at some point in the final decades, and the accounts of its loss are among the more painful passages in the historical record of the period. But one visitor to that library left an account of what it contained. He described rooms filled with chests, each chest devoted to a single subject, catalogs listing the titles, and works from ancient authors that he had never seen anywhere else and never saw again. He was a young physician who had been permitted access after treating a member of the ruling family. His name was Ibn Sina, and the education he received in Samanid Bukhara would reshape medicine and philosophy across 2 continents. There is a further element of the Samanid system that deserves attention because it explains both the dynasty's strength and its collapse. The Samanid army rested heavily on Turkic military slaves, known as ghulams or mamluks, purchased or captured on the northern steppe and trained through a graded system of service. A recruit progressed through fixed stages, each with its own rank, equipment, and privileges, until the most capable could reach the highest commands of the state. The system produced disciplined and formidable cavalry. It also produced commanders whose loyalty was personal rather than dynastic, and who possessed both the troops and the experience to establish states of their own. Alptegan at Gazna was not an aberration. He was the predictable outcome of the structure the Samanids had built. The religious and legal life of the state was also organized. Bukhara was a center of Hanafi jurisprudence, and its scholars trained students who carried that legal tradition east into the Turkic world and south into India. The city's reputation for learning was so firmly established that the phrase describing Bukhara as a dome of Islam entered common usage across the region. Transoxiana in this period also produced compilations of hadith, works of Quranic commentary, and the theological arguments of the Maturidi school, named for a Samarkand scholar whose framework became one of the two dominant systems of Sunni theology and remains so today. The scale of the northern silver trade can be measured with unusual precision because the coins themselves carry mint names and dates. Hoards recovered from Gotland in the Baltic, from sites along the Volga, and from settlements in Poland and northern Germany contain Samanid dirhams struck at Samarkand, Bukhara, and Al-Shash, the mint at the site of modern Tashkent. The dates on the coins allow archaeologists to track the flow year by year, and they show a peak in the middle decades of the 10th century, followed by a sharp contraction. Few economic relationships from the early medieval world can be reconstructed in such detail, and the picture that emerges places Central Asian mints at the center of a trading system that reached the Arctic. The physical evidence of the dynasty is still standing. The mausoleum of Ismail Samani in Bukhara, built in the early 10th century, is one of the oldest surviving monuments of Islamic architecture in Central Asia. It is a cube of baked brick, roughly 10 meters on each side, topped by a dome, with walls laid in patterns that catch the light differently at every hour of the day. It survived the Mongol destruction of Bukhara because by the 13th century it had been buried under accumulated soil and was invisible. It was excavated in the 20th century and stands today essentially intact after more than 1,100 years. The Samanid century established a pattern that would repeat in Central Asia. A stable state generates surplus. The surplus funds scholarship and construction. The scholarship outlives the state by centuries. Bukhara, in the year 950, held more books, trained more physicians, and paid more poets than any city in Europe, and the men who studied there produced work that the universities of Paris, Bologna, and Oxford would still be teaching in the 17th century. The dynasty that made that possible lasted barely more than 100 years, and its capital would be burned to the ground 2 centuries later by an army from the eastern steppe. What survived was not the empire. What survived was what the empire had paid for. History isn't just the past, it's the record of how the present came to be. Comment below with the period of Central Asian history you would like covered next. If this kind of documented, source-based history speaks to you, consider liking and subscribing so more of it can reach you. This video uses AI-generated audio and visuals for educational purposes only.